For the next segment, we are joined by the Honorary Pak Riza Yamora Sriga, Special Advisor to Indonesia's Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs. Despite a deflationary outlook for the commodity complex, Indonesia's current account balance is still positive. Pak Riza is here today to share with us his insights on how Indonesia plans to manage its CAB going forward, and also its economic transformation. And moderating this segment is Pak Widianto, CEO of Maybank Securities Indonesia. Gentlemen, may I please invite you onto the stage, please?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. It is a great pleasure for me today to introduce our speakers that will talk about Indonesia in a race to become the next economic powerhouse. Indonesia is the largest economy in ASEAN, a member of G20 with a GDP of 1.3 trillion and with a GDP growth of 5.31% in 2022 and 280 million young population, Indonesia needs strong and supportive government policies to sustain strong growth, lower risk premium, and reduce our Gini coefficient. Our speaker, Dr. Reza Siregar, is Special Advisor to the Coordinating Minister for the Economic Affairs, Republic of Indonesia, and Head of IFG Progress Indonesia Financial Group. He held many notable positions in the past, including as the Chief Representative of the Singapore office at the Institute of International Finance, Senior Economist of International Monetary Fund, Executive Director and Chief ASEAN Economist at Goldman Sachs, Singapore, and Lead Economist at the ASEAN +3 Macroeconomic Research Office in Singapore. Dr. Reza Siregar holds a PhD in economics from Brown University. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Reza Siregar. Silakan.
Terima kasih, Pak Willem. Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking the host for giving me the opportunity. Again, I'm not comfortable representing the government here, so if you don't mind, let me just be talking on my own perspective, so I can give you at least a balanced view. My experience at Goldman and also at the Institute of International Finance on this type of occasions taught me that you guys probably know better than I do in many of these things that I'm going to talk about. So it is always easy for me to be at least honest of what I don't know, and at least we can exchange and talk what the issues that we face currently in Indonesia. Let me just highlight two key issues in the next 20-25 minutes. One, I want to share with you my experience in the last few months talking to different colleagues from Singapore, from London, and the US on Indonesian economy. And then I want to give you a bit of platform in terms of what are the commitments that we have, at least the level of commitments that we have in the government for the next 20-odd years. And this is something that's still hopefully going to be continuing beyond 2024. Let me start with the following. It is actually quite humbling for me in the last few months. I have colleagues coming from Singapore, all colleagues. They bring their clients from London, from the US. I like this type of gathering. And in some cases, we have a smaller, more intimate discussion so we can have a bit more frank and honest discussions. It is amazing that every time I finish the discussions, it is always, I find myself to be much more cautious than they are. They are much more optimistic. So I thought, hey, I'm supposed to be selling my economy here, but there seems to be actually selling more of what I should be thinking about my economy than I'm. There are a number of things. One, obviously, the twin deficits. Budget deficit and current account deficit have improved significantly in the last few years. Yeah. Now, obviously, in the beginning of COVID, it was predominantly because of the weak activities as well. But I think in the last few months, in the last few quarters, we have seen the improvement in the budget deficit and the improvement in the current account deficit have largely been because of some of the much better economic activities, much better than anticipated. So that gives them a lot of confidence in terms of the economy of Indonesia. And if you go back and just look at something that I always follow quite closely is the differential between the US Fed fund rate and the BI policy rate and some of the key market rate indicators. In average, for instance, when I noticed pre-crisis, at least there's 200 to 300 basis points between what we have in Indonesia in terms of policy rate and what we have in the Fed fund rate. Yeah? In the last few quarters, the number has dwindled down. Yeah? And it seems to be like market does not see that as a risk, and especially if you look at that in terms of the rupiah. Yeah, so this is a quite interesting phenomenon, and I keep asking them as well and have my discussion with colleagues from the market about this. Obviously, the transformations that we are taking place, and I think Pak Iwan and I have seen many of the colleagues in the beginning talk about the transformation in the digital economies and the digital space of the world. We are moving into that. Now, I would bring this into a bigger picture, and I will spend a bit more time on this. It is not just EVs. I hope this is something much bigger than EVs for us. It is the downstreaming of the industrial policy. We are the largest producer of many of the key commodities. You know, you're talking about nickel, you're talking about copper, you're talking about tin. Yeah, we are talking about coal. We want to move beyond just primary export. And EV is just part of transformations resulting from their transitions into a downstreaming policy. Yeah? So I think we are moving into that, and I think markets start to appreciate that as well. Digital penetration is important as well for us. So I was just talking about, when I talk about EV here, I'm talking about obviously the transitions to the green economy, renewable energy. But digital transformation is very important for us. We have 270 million people. 2020, less than 50% of Indonesia have access to bank. We have over 17,000 islands. It's very difficult for us to get access in terms of physical bank. So when we think about digital penetration, we think about inclusiveness, financial inclusiveness. Now, we deviated a bit in terms of our definition of financial inclusiveness. International standard put it as access to bank, having bank account. For us, it's access to digital transaction on the financial sector. Yeah, we are moving into that, and this is something that we are continuously pursuing. And I'll speaking about more on this, and this is something that really close to my heart. I joined, and the government asked me, the State-owned Enterprise Ministry asked me to establish the first think tank on the non-bank financial institutions, looking at insurance and pension fund. I'm just a macro guy that happens to like research. So I took up the challenge, and not knowingly I understood what are the questions that I was not able to answer when I was at Goldman and also at the IIF. It's basically lay within the foundation of risk mitigations and pension funds. So I'll come back to that. So again, digitalization provides us with ample opportunity on that. And my friends, the opportunity for digital penetrations and green transformations require a lot of financing. Long-term financing. And that's where I think insurance and pension will be critical as well, because they can be very supporting of each other. I'll come back to that. Another thing that they keep talking about when they talk about Indonesia so aggressively is the young populations. So we are basically receiving that demography, and we see that in terms of, you think about e-commerce. In 2000, data shows that only 2 million of Indonesians have access to internet. By 2019, that number blew up to about 170 odd million. And they are mostly young populations. You know what you mean, right? They are spenders. Yeah, so those are potential. And then I don't have to tell you about the capital market. Pak Suhaimi, Chuck Win here, Wak Win can tell you about what happens to the IPOs, the equity market. What we saw in the last 1 year is amazing growth in terms of the IPOs, the M&As, and so on. So those has been the critical. Those has been always the message that I keep hearing from London, from US, all the way from the regions about Indonesia. But I want to give you a bit of a broad policy issues that we face. Now again, not to dampen your optimism, I hope not. But I think just to share you that we are talking about this issue, and hopefully while we are enjoying what we have, we at the government also appreciating the challenge ahead. In the short run, last year we were the chairman of the G20, this year we are the chairman of ASEAN. So these are the things that we consistently tabling on those leadership meetings. On the immediate issues is back to the resilient growth. What does that mean? Health is going to be number one. We had pandemic. We never prepared pandemic. I could talk to you 2 days easily about what happens during the pandemic. I left my country 40 years ago. I came back 40 years after living abroad, from student to work in Singapore, in US, and so on. In 2020, I went home to join Pak Erlangga Hartarto, coordinating minister, as a special advisor. March, we have COVID. Yeah, from an economist to become anything but economist. Yeah, and we just have to do everything. Yeah, and that, my friend, health issues, you can talk anything, stimulus, whatever, is meaningless if you don't take care of your health issues. Yeah, so again, that's something that we table. How do we have a global efforts on this? The key questions that Pak Budi Sadikan asked me, so I don't understand. When we have crisis, we have the World Bank, we have the IMF. When we have a pandemic, where do we go? Yeah, so that's basically the beginning of our thinking. How do we actually have a global system on this? That where we are coordinated in terms of distributions of products, productions, and so on, for dealing with health issues. Energy and food security. Unfortunately, the geopolitical tensions taught us again that energy and food security are, again, always going to be an issue. And countries have resorted to voluntary export restrictions simply to make sure their own population have enough. Yeah? So this is something that we also have to coordinate. We are working on ASEAN also on this. And then, of course, financial stability. Yeah, we are moving into financial regional safety net system. We are talking about the Chiang Mai initiative among the ASEAN. Again, this is something that we established in 2011. I remember when I came to AMRO, I was the first economist to join AMRO, ASEAN Plus 3 Macroeconomic Research Office, just to create this stability focus among us. We are talking about not the dollarization in terms of not using US dollar. That's something that we never thought of. Yeah, but we are looking at into ways to reduce and to become less dependency on the usage of US dollar. So I hope those are two different things, right? So we are moving into that. How do we use our QR code, for instance, to settlement and so on? How do we use a local currency? Those are something that we thought that we also need to table. So those are immediate issues that we are working on right now. Okay? But those are the foundations to resilient growth. Those are the foundations to where we can achieve the long-term growth. Now, what are the long-term growth? For us, again, that example of EV is the example of our commitment to downstream of our industrial policy. We are producing, we have reserve of nickel, yeah, tin, copper, and many other commodities, among the largest in the world. In fact, nickel, I think we are number 1 in the world. Yeah. But if you look at our export, our productions are nowhere to be ranked in the world. Those are the questions that Pak Jokowi asked us. I remember in the beginning of 2023, Pak Jokowi asked us, hey, I thought we have the largest surplus ever last year. What happens to our reserve? How come you don't see anything in terms of the reserve that we have? Where the US dollar? Where the input in the local economy? What the impact of the local economy? Okay, so we are not in the supply value chains. We are just exporting a basic materials. We are not in the system. We are not in the value chains. Now, unless we are in the value chains, we are only going to be at the mercy of the global commodity cycles. Yeah, so that's the essence here. So where we are actually getting hit left and right from the Europeans and other part of the world in terms of our export restrictions, but I hope you all understand as well, there's a commitment that we have to do in order to strengthen our industrial base. We don't want to dampen any one industrial base capacity growth, but we want to make sure also that we are also part of the supply value chain. So that's the long-term strategy. Digital, I'll give you some example of what we are looking at in terms of digital and also green transformation. So those are the two broad policy: immediate, resilient growth, back to resilient growth, and then going back to the long-term growth. Now the bottom line, the commitment is again 2045, Pak Jokowi commitment to become industrial economy. Now, whether it's impossible or it's a dream, we can debate that. But I think if we are committed to that 20 years target, now we have not have a long-term target since Pak Suharto. Yeah, and during that Pak Suharto, we have this 5 years plan, long-term plan. But post Pak Suharto, President Suharto, we don't have that. So what I like about this 2545 is basic 2045 is the long-term visions that we can see as an anchor for our policy growth. I don't want to talk this too much on details, but these are some of the key projects. But what I want to highlight here is basically, this is blueprints that we produced at the Coordinating Ministry for Economic Affairs. This is what we call the National Strategy Project. So this is part of this long-term targeting of this 2045. We have a number of projects, a number of national programs. That this number continues to be dynamic. Yeah. Now, obviously, some of it is going to be public, some of it is going to be private, but the tone is again downstream. The tone is again social safety net. The tone is again more of the technologies. So I'll come back to this one in more detail, but again, this is just some of the numbers that you can take a look. Okay. I want to show you some of the challenges. Again, as I said to you from the beginning, I want to have a balanced view. I don't want to just be someone telling you all the good things, because I don't think you believe me anyway to begin with. Yeah? So let me be honest with you. This is what we face. And I think this is a challenge, but that can be turned easily into opportunity, and for you guys to take advantage of. One is demography. Yes, we are young now, but not in 20-odd years. Yeah, that's reality, my friend. We are all getting older. Yeah? And by United Nations definitions, not by me, not by the Indonesian government, 2045, we are moving into a population demographic where a big bulk of our population are in the age of 61 above. Dependency, yeah? So, populations, this is where health are critical. This is one issue of non-bank financial institution will be critical. I'll come back to that. So this is one challenge or one thinking that we always have. And this is why the next 20 years become critical. And if I may add, and I don't want to talk about this, please, if I may have an excuse on this one, this is why the next president will be critical. The next president could be our president for the next 10 years. The next 20 years will be a critical period whether we are going to be able to come close or to become the developed economy or not. Yeah? Because in the past, we have numbers of years. Now we have 20 years, so it's not much. Oops. Digital-wise, you guys talking about AI. I'm just a government official here, so I'm using my government official as to give myself an excuse of not knowing much about AI. But the idea is this, okay? You talk about the big thing. I'm talking about the infrastructure. OJK, our supervisory authority agency, for right or wrong reasons, come up with a policy that in many countries also in this part of the world, where financial data has to be localized. Okay? So data localizations, there's a big debate. I remember when I was working at the Institute of International Finance, there's a long list of debate, the pro and cons. Yeah, is it going to be much more safe if you have data localized or not? Is it going to be, you have a lot more independency, sovereignty by having data localization or not? Yeah, so those are the debates. But the bottom line is this. I did my research here. This is with my think tank, IFG Progress. In 2020, by the end of 2020, Indonesia data center capacity is less than 100 megawatt, around 75, 80 megawatt system. So I just make a simple, again, I'm not a good forecaster, so what I do basically, I just look at countries that are in the range of 20,000 per capita above, 20,000 US dollar per capita above. So I'm thinking, okay, so I'm going to be advising Pak Erlangga to become developed countries. What will be needed for this data localization? These are the numbers. Yeah, from a small country like Portugal, they have data capacity about 400 megawatt system, all the way to countries like Singapore, and here you can take a look some of that, Japan, South Korea. The number is above 1,000 to 2,000 megawatt. Indonesia at this point have 75 megawatt system. So what I'm trying to convince my colleague at the government is basically, okay, so we have a problem here. Are we going to pursue the financial development? Yeah, and then what happens to our data centers? So how do we keep up with this? Or we are going to stop the financial sector development, which we cannot afford, yeah, to do so, while we are waiting for financial data center deepening. Okay? So again, an opportunity very much open here. And I keep reminding my colleague at the government, the policy has to be flexible. We cannot just be pushing one way, otherwise it's a chicken and egg here. Which one that you do first? Yeah, so this is a challenge that we also recognize. Capacity, we are building massive data center in Batam and Bintan to basically enhance this capacity. Climate and environmental challenge. If you live along the line of fires, you don't need to be told about climate and the changes and the impact of climate change. Yeah? We are countries that are experiencing a lot of GDP loss because of, you name it, flood, earthquakes, yeah, environmental changes, environmental damages we experience. We are among the producer of carbon, about 2% of global carbon are being produced in Indonesia. It's small relative to countries like the United States, obviously, some of the developed countries, yeah. But the growth of carbon that we produce is among the fastest, okay. So these are also challenges for us, yeah. 60% of our electricity producing is based on coal, yeah, non-renewable energy. So how do we transit this? We cannot just basically say, move away from your natural advantage and then and abandon it and suddenly we become green. Someone told me just now that based on a study done by, if I'm not mistaken, Monetary Authority of Singapore, is 200 billion US dollar in ASEAN. I bet you anything, half of that is in Indonesia. Yeah? So imagine 100 billion. So if you look at from 2020 to 2030, yeah, 100 billion per year, that's 1 trillion. Yeah. Now our GDP is 1.3 trillion. Okay. So again, there's opportunity. There's massive opportunity there. You're talking about, again, as I said, the EVs or of solar power, opportunities of other the transition to energy economies are also quite critical. Now, the biggest challenge to me is basically back to down to earth. This is where I hope you guys can appreciate also along with me. We don't have the financial sector debt. We don't have the financial power. For a $1.3 trillion economy, our financial sector is only 120% of our GDP, nominal GDP. This is at the end of 2020. Again, for simplicity, if I were to see Indonesia at the $22,000 per capita, what are the typical size of financial sector that we have to have? The number at least 300% above of the nominal GDP. So within the next 2 years, we need to triple our financial sector. Now, what is critical also when you study all those developed countries, they have to have broad-based financial sector. It cannot be just bank-based financial sector. It has to be also non-bank and banking financial sector. So if you look at those countries that have developed, including in this region, Malaysia for instance, the role of pensions are critical. I mean, you know, it's CPF in Singapore, EPF Co-op in Malaysia. Those are the source of domestic financial resources. Can you imagine developing into developed countries relying on FDI or even relying on other type of external flows? Even FDI, at the end of the day, those are external debts, something that we have to pay. So there's no way you're going to be having a sustainable and stable growth unless you have your own financing capacity. And this is my final point where I think, and this is something that I become very, very strong conviction, having a strong convictions. We need, and I think I'm not talking about just Indonesia here, I think we need also talking about Southeast Asia, and I keep telling this also to my colleague at ASEAN Plus 3 Microeconomic Research Office. If we think about financial sector stability, we think about economic stability, we need to think about pension fund, we need to think about insurance. There is no way that we can basically pursue this fast rate changes economy without having a domestic resources and without having risk mitigations. Otherwise, you're just going to be borrowing money at a very high cost economy. When I was at Goldman, I keep asking myself, why the hell Indonesia paying 6% on 10 years government bonds when we are one of the political stable countries with a strong rapid growth? My answer right now, my hunch is that, look, we don't have risk mitigation domestically. Every one of you came to my countries, you take the risk. So you basically impose on us to pay higher yield. Okay? So unless we have our own capacity, 6%, 7%, I tested to Bank Mandiri and a number of big banks in Indonesia. If you get a 6%, 7% government bond yield at 10% at 10 years, would you lower your lending rate? They say no. Then how do you get banking penetrations at 6, 7% interest rate at the minimum, or 8, 9% if you're paying your lending rate to the lower income holder of Indonesia? There's no way. You're stuck. So the only way to move that financial debtness, if you prepare your you prepare your non-bank. Imagine, if you look at that data on the right, this is something that I learned. You see the period of higher NPL, higher loan at risk associated with higher credit insurance claim. That's a bit unique in Indonesia. If you look at the premium in Indonesia insurance, one of the largest is coming from the credit insurance. In fact, my estimate, 70% of loan at risk at the end of 2020 are being insured. So what does that mean, my friend? If you guys think that the banking is stable, that's because someone else is taking your risk. Okay? I'm not going to go further on this because I'm going to dampen your... We are going to approach this differently this time. We are going to do omnibus. We did it omnibus in job creations. We did it also this year with the financial sector omnibus. The idea is very straightforward. The problem with us is obesity in regulations. Thousands of regulations. Amazing when I came home for the first time after living in Singapore, Australia, US, Malaysia. I mean, everything is regulated. Over 10,000 regulations at the level of central government, local government, and others. So if you just take one sector and try to reform that, or one aspect try to reform that, meaningless. So that's why we come up with this omnibus. Omnibus is basically cross-sectoral reforms, encompassing, in the case of job creation, 70-odd laws. Okay? And I'm glad that we have a uniformity in terms of coordination, in terms of the politics under Pak Jokowi, where we can push it to the parliaments. It was long, 3 years of fight, but we managed to do that. And it's a very simple achievement, simple target. Again, downstreaming, value chains, creating the formal and the informal sector into formal. 50% of Indonesian economy in informal sector at least. So how do you build up a pension fund where most people are not even in the formal sector? They're not even registered. Okay? How do you channel your policy when you're not even registered? Okay? So supply chains, small, medium enterprises, downstream, are those part of those job creation zone. And under the basic law of the omnibus in the financial sector is the focus on non-bank. The focus on insurance, the focus on pension, yeah? And there are other things that I would also can add to that, and we can discuss this. So let me end by this, okay? If we have our dream of $22,000 per capita by 2045, we need to grow nominally by at least 10%, yeah, for the next 20 odd years. Very difficult. If you look at the number, the real GDP growth and inflations, you can see that the real GDP growth around 5% in the last several years. And, if the natural process are taking place, they might be somewhat slower as the economy gets larger. So, even if, let's say, we grow only around 4%, now if manage inflation by 4%, there's 8% growth. Now, my simple back-to-envelope calculations, that still give us at least 15,000 odd per capita. For a country, by 2045, 7% growth annually, 0.7% growth annually of populations, that will give us about close to 300 million people by the end of 2045. 15,000, that's 4.5 trillion. It's not bad. Yeah, if you get lucky, we get 7 trillions. Yeah, so again, it's a balanced view, I think, but I think this is something that I can offer to you this morning. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Pak Willy, may I just make a brief announcement, please?
Yeah.
The organizing committee would just like me to inform all guests that you can send your questions to the panelists, especially Pak Riza. And the way to do this is through an app. The QR code to access this app is at the back of your badge. Thank you. Over to you, Pak Willy.
Thank you. Pak Reza, before we get the question from the floor, you mentioned just now that our dream to be a developed country by 2045. Right now, the interest rate differential between central bank, Bank Indonesia policy and Federal Reserve policy has narrowed down. But how can we maintain that going forward? And what is the homework and the challenge that the government is facing? What needs to be done for us to achieve our dream in 2045?
Thank you, Pak Willem. I think this is the critical challenge. Again, if you go back, lessons from what we have seen, why Indonesia has been able to experience less the impact of the hike in the US policy rate. It's one very simple phenomena. We don't have a financial sector deepness. Yeah, leverage is low. Yeah, so I always joke among my colleague in the policymakers, we are always in the lucky side of the game. Yeah, when the turbulence in the supply value chains before the COVID, we escaped that. Why? Because we don't have much to export anyway in the supply value chains. Now, when we get into this fight in the hike of interest rate, we escape that as well because again, public debt, less than 40% of GDP, household debt is very low because mortgage system is not available, but not much availability or very expensive. And corporate debt also very low compared to even our neighboring partners countries. Yeah. So in that scheme of things, we escape from this interest rate differential issues, or at least we managed to reduce the impact. Going forward, that lessons means that we need to rely on the domestic capacity. And this is why I think that financial sector development, the NBFI development is critical. We need to have our own natural capacity, which is basically our own pension fund, and risk mitigation, which is our insurance.
On this pension fund that you mentioned and the insurance mentioned, IFG was kind of like rebrand or established from Bahana in 2020, right? So that was only 3 years old. And what is the main mandate for IFG and the role in playing, reducing the Indonesia risk premium going forward?
A number of things, but from my side, the basic thing is, again, my side, I mean, I established from zero an institution, a think tank called IFG Progress. I'm sorry, most of our publications are in Bahasa, but the goal is basically twofold. One is basically literasi. Indonesians still do not understand what is insurance sometimes. They forget that insurance is protections policy, not investment policies. Okay, so we have a lot of people getting burned because of that. Second issue is policymakers. Appreciating the fact that these are the most critical time that we need to have in terms of building our own pensions and insurance policy. So that's one thing. Now, for the institution itself, for the Indonesian state-owned insurance, so again, Indonesian Financial Group is a holding of all the state-owned insurance companies. It's under one holding now. And also we have a guarantor, the Jamkrindo and Askrindo, the credit guarantor, are all also under our own group. It's about $140 trillion holdings. The idea is basically, in order for us to be able to coordinate and harmonize and strengthen the capacity, we need to bring them together. You have a lot of these state-owned insurance, they're actually competing against each other in terms of the products. They're not disciplined. The life insurance selling general insurance products. The general insurance products selling the life insurance products. Okay? And so we need to establish that. We need to establish the Sharia also. So part of that is second, to develop our own capacity. And the last one is actually helping the governments. So we are part of the institutions where we work together with Minister of Finance, we work together with OJK. Again, in Indonesia, it's quite unique where the Minister of Finance is the owner, representative, the owner of the state-owned enterprises. The state-owned enterprises ministry is the operator. Sometimes they have a conflicting views in terms of how to manage the state-owned enterprises. So we need to basically having an institution that hopefully coordinate and help them harmonize their policies. This is a general view.
Thank you. There's a question from the floor, Pak Reza Siregar. On the EV sector, we know that the government has been pushing for the development of the battery industry and try to push also for the EV automotive sector. But is it also looking at the sustainability on that part of the industry, in the sense that looking at the recycling and the waste management going forward? How are we going to see that?
Yes, that's something also, again, we have been experiencing good story with EVs. But the reality is that, I think Pak Iwan just reminded us that the technology changed rapidly. Yeah, within 2-3 years, we have seen this shift. I just came back from my usual visit to Tokyo. I'm a faculty member at the Hitotsubatsu universities, where every year I have to spend a few weeks in Tokyo to teach. And during my stay, I usually speak to a number of the professors who is actually working on this. You know, in Japan, they already start moving into hydrogen. Toyota is actually focusing on that. Okay? So one thing that I keep reminding my colleagues at the government is that, look, are you sure that our nickel is going to be the driver of EVs in the future? Or is it going to be another source of whatever it is? Yeah. So how do we strategize on this very dynamic environment of changes? Now again, the commitment to electric vehicles is there. Yeah, the commitment in terms of transitions to the green economy is there. But the issues that we face, where do we invest and how do we invest sustainably? Yeah, and that's something that is still a challenge, but because again, the technology itself are very dynamic.
Thank you, Pak. The other question is that on the investment going forward and on the major project Indonesia going to embark, especially on the Nusantara, Pak, the new IKN, the new capital of Indonesia. How the government, or how can we be confident that this project will be carried forward by the next incoming president, and how the government is going to fund that project?
Okay, this is where I'm no longer the government officials. We are not moving, one thing we have to remember, my friends, we are not moving our capital city. This is not from Bonn to Berlin. We are building new capital city out of nothing. Okay? Yeah. So what is the worst can happen to that? We have new infrastructure in Kalimantan. First-class infrastructure in Kalimantan. Yeah. Again, I don't want to lose my job here, but it's a reality, right? I mean, you learn from Canberra, you learn from Putrajaya, yeah. Yeah. Again, I don't want to mention other capitals, but it takes years. It's hard and soft infrastructure, right? The hard one we can basically do quickly, maybe quickly. But the soft one, education-based, health-based, so that people can move and function as a family. Those are years. We are not, we cannot force the doctors to move, right? We can encourage, we can give them incentive. Yeah. So, but imagine Kalimantan, part of Kalimantan, with these significantly developed facilities that continuously building up into the capital. The capital is already under the constitutional law, so we are moving into that as it is. Yeah, the issue is that the transitions to it. So my answer to that is we are committed to that. My answer as an economist, not a government official, I'm going to benefit from the infrastructure, but as far as when it's going to be a fully functional capital city,
it will take time.
That's your answer, Pak.
Okay, Pak. There is a lot of, continue into this, there's a lot of major infrastructure project, a lot of major policy that laid out by the current government and has been very positive for the market in the past 10 years. The election is coming in February 2024. How can we be ensured that all this legacy, all this project, and all this policy will continue to move into the next direction? Is there any way, any law that is putting out to ensure that it's not going to be easily derailed by the new government?
A number of their projects, a big chunk of their projects, are already signed as a contracts. Yeah, so that's done deal in terms of, and has initiated. They're mostly joint venture projects. They are not just local. Again, we don't have enough investment capacity to do it locally. Okay, so I think that's commitment is already there. A second thing also, the politics of Indonesia is under. I'm not saying it's immature, but there are certain things that Pak Jokowi did that convinced Indonesian that this is the way to go. And I think this is something that, if you look at every single candidates that we have right now, they're basically talking about similar issue as well. I mean, when I was working in Singapore, it is always my commitment to actually drive causeway all the way to Kuala Lumpur to meet Pak Suhaimi and brainstorming about the economy. And now I can do the same thing. I can go across Java Island with cars. In the next couple of years, we're going to be able to go across Sumatra with cars easily. Yeah, and now we are moving into this capital in Kalimantan. So those infrastructure is already convincing people, and that is easy for us to basically continue based on that. So I think the main thing about downstreaming, the main thing about this infrastructure, the main thing about all of this national strategic is actually to get the buy-in of the people. Once the buy-in of the people, it's very difficult for the politicians to go back on that, because they will face the people. That's one thing that typically we see in Jakarta, in Indonesia.
Okay, thank you. Once that's being done, right, and now it's pretty much being done as people love Jokowi so much, right? The next one going to be the human capital, which is a big challenge for Indonesia, how to develop and how to harness our human capital. I mean, is there anything that government is planning or government is going to do? Because there has been an issue for Indonesia for quite some time.
Thank you, Pat. This is something dear to me. I started, after I finished my PhD, I started as an assistant professor at National University of Singapore at the Department of Economics. And then I moved to University in Australia, University of Adelaide, as an associate professor. So it's very dear to me. So what we did, we create a number of, not just a number, hundreds of industrial economic zone, okay? Where in that zone, we free up in terms of mobility of labor, we have a facility of tax, we have movement of inputs, we facilitate easy permits, easy policy permits, yeah? So one of them is basically on education. For the first time, but this is 2 years ago, where Monash University established full-fledged program. They do it only in a master program at this point, without having a joint ventures. Yeah? So Monash actually have their own university, detached from any joint ventures, able to bring their own faculties. They can decide their own faculties, do not have to have Indonesian as the faculty member if they don't want to. And that's already well run. And this is only like an hour away. They call it in the city of BSD, only an hour away from the capital, from Jakarta, during the traffic period. Yeah? So it's already there. We are going to do the same thing also on the health in Bali, yeah, where we open up also the space. So education is critical. We are creating this special economic zone, special industrial zone, and we look forward and we are negotiating, we are talking to a number of big name universities around the world to establish their own campuses also in Indonesia.
Is that going to be the model for any other industry as well? Health, for example, that you mentioned. I believe that President Jokowi has just inaugurated the International Hospital in Bali. Is that something that we are looking to copy as well?
Yes, exactly. So the goal of this, what we call the industrial economic zone, either the individual, corporations, even the local government can propose, yeah, areas to become industrial economic zone. Okay? As long as they can basically provide the plan, the plan and the investment strategies who are coming immediately, this economic zone are basically going to be proposed. So you don't have only in certain part of Indonesia, let's say in Sumatra. No, you have it in Java, not far away from Jakarta. The size are depending on what requested. So in Bali, for instance, I forgot how big is that, 100 something?
Hospital bed?
No, the size of the
land.
The land.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's basically where we are going to have a focus on Mayo Hospital from the US to come in. So it's for cancer, for aging populations focusing. Again, the idea is this. As long as those things that are produced in those special economic zones are not being used to be shift into the local economy, so there's a complete dichotomy. And the goal is actually to help us with our export. Now, when I'm saying export here, I'm talking also reducing our current account deficit. The biggest current account deficit that we have is from the service, health and education. So if we have our own establishment in Indonesia, that is something that we're also hoping to see. So these are the models that we are working upon. We have been, for instance, there's a big rejection from the European when we stop our nickel export, right? Obviously, we are well understood that they're also seeing this as a problem for their own local industry, yeah, where they depend heavily on our export. So what we propose to them, why don't you join us producing what it is that you need in your own countries in this special or industrial economic zone, so you have an ownership in this production base, and then once you produce it already in a higher value added, you can ship them out. You can shift it to your own industry back home. So the idea is that not that we want to block it for the sake of our own industry, but we want to create our own industry to be part of your supply chains. So come to us, yeah, establish your own companies in this special economic zone, producing it in on your own will, yeah, because you are the owners. Ship it back to your own countries with the facility that you have as a special economic zone, and that's going to be mutual benefit between us and the trading partner. So yes, but this is going the strategy.
Thank you very much. But we are running out of time, so I just want to ask one latest question, very short question. When we're talking about growing the insurance business in Indonesia, will government is also thinking of allowing foreign to actually own 100% of the insurance business in Indonesia? I have my chairman here, but
Okay, so this is where I'm going to be non-government again. Imagine, Pak, we have our insurance sector is less than 10% of GDP. I think if depending on what exactly the insurance that you're looking at. Pension fund is also very small. Okay? Now, insurance or providing risk mitigations to the banking, as I said to you, yeah, over 70% in my estimate of loan at risk in 2021 or 2020 are being insured. Now, if the banking system about 60% of the economy, capital market about 60% of the economy, yeah, and insurance less than 10%. Now, I'm not talking about the health. I'm not talking about other activities. Imagine how unstable the economic system. You know, you have insurance, providing risk mitigations to much wider, much larger sector of the economy. It's not going to be stable. Okay? So this is the fight part of literacy. When I'm talking about literacy, it's not just literacy at the level of household. Literacy at the level of industry. We need actuaries. We have less actuaries than Malaysia. Yeah, 270 million people. If we think about that, is going to be our insurance base, we need our actuaries. Okay? Capital is definitely a big factor. Between 2015 to 2019, our current account deficit on the pension and insurance is about $600 million per year. By 2022, the balance of payment data show the number has ballooned up to about $2 billion. It's obvious we don't have a capital. We don't have the human resource. But it's also obvious that unless we are moving into that directions, there's no way we're going to have a financial deepening, meaningful financial deepening that we need. So I cannot say for the on the behalf of the government on this, but I think capital is definitely a must. The game of the insurance is the game of capital power, right? You are playing with liabilities. Unless you have your own capital resources to manage that liabilities, you will not be able to grow. You will not be able to manage the liabilities that is growing in Indonesia. And when they are growing, what happens then? They're just going to go out. Okay, so we have two options. You let your current account deficit widen, or you prepare and bring those people again, like the way we talk about the educations, like the way we talk about health, bring them in. Now, again, I'm just an economist here. That's my answer, Pak. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Pak. Thank you for the balanced view today, and thank you for giving us the light on how Indonesia are going to sustain the growth going forward. Thank you very much, Pak Reza.
Thank you very much for the game.
Thank you, Pak Riza and Pak Willianto, for your keen insight on Indonesia.